All right, good Tuesday to all. It's 6 p.m. here in Finland, so it's time to start today's webinar. Greetings from Finland to everyone, and welcome to today's Firstbeat webinar with a very relevant topic and some interesting data from the education sector in the US. Use of stress measurements to optimize performance in socially demanding jobs. We are broadcasting from the Firstbeat office in Jyväskylä, with our guest speaker Erika Thieman joining in from Urbana, Illinois. My name is Tiina Hoffman. I'm an exercise physiologist here at Firstbeat, and I'll be hosting today's session. You can ask questions during the webinar by writing them in the chat window, and we have also received a few questions in advance, and they have already been integrated into the presentation today. At the end of the presentation, I will read for Erika to answer. If we don't have time to answer all the questions today, we will send the answers to you via email over the next couple of days. If you want to learn more details about the Firstbeat Lifestyle Assessment method that Erika will also be referring to in her presentation, please visit our website's Wellness Services section or contact us here at Firstbeat. You can also find some of our previous webinar podcasts on the website on a number of different topics. I would now like to introduce today's guest speaker, Dr. Erika Thieman. Erika is a teacher educator and education researcher at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Her work focuses on the context and impact of resilience and stress in high-stress professions. Professor Thieman has 13 years of experience as an educator at both the public school, secondary, and university levels, from remote rural serving districts to large suburban districts. She has utilized Firstbeat methods in her research for about 7 years now. So, welcome, Erika. It's all yours now.
Thank you very much. Good morning from Illinois. It is about 10 o'clock in the morning here. So Tina gave me a great short introduction. I am a former high school teacher, and now I work with future teachers at the University of Illinois. Teachers that I've worked with around the country in different school districts that I've consulted with. The one driving question that I try to answer is, how does stress and resilience impact the workplace for people who are in pretty high stress positions? I have worked with police officers. I've worked with a lot of educators at all different levels, including administrators, and I am now starting to work with veterinarians. That is a field in the US that we have an increasing suicide rate, so the veterinarians that I'm working with are very excited to be taking me on board with them. So to get into the presentation, what I did is I structured the presentation kind of around the questions I was sent in advance because they were relevant to the information I had already pulled together. So I have 5 questions that we will be answering through the presentation, and then of course if you have questions at the end, I'll gladly field those. So the first one will look at what happens when people who are not aware of their stress, and how do we make them aware of stress. That is one of the primary things that I've been able to do with the work I do. The second will be practical tools to lower stress in socially demanding jobs. Third is, how can one control stress in social situations so that they don't impact the people around them as much. Fourth, we have testing of strategies to enhance recovery or reduce stress levels. And then we have one on ensuring development of physical performance in people who have socially demanding work. I don't go into this one a whole lot, but I do have a little bit of information on it. So I want to start off by kind of setting a baseline so you understand the perspective that I'm coming from. What I'm doing is I propose a radical paradigm shift. I think we talk about lowering stress all the time. How do we reduce stress? How do we prevent stress from happening? And at the end of the day, you really cannot prevent stress from happening. For police, teachers, veterinarians, they can't prevent somebody from coming into conflict with them. The veterinarian cannot prevent the fact that they are going to have to euthanize somebody's animal and have to comfort the owners through that. The teacher cannot help that parents sometimes do not like the feedback that they have for their students, and sometimes there's conflict. Law enforcement cannot help that they are going to have to get into conflict every day with their job. So I am not seeking to reduce and lower stress because it's not feasible for the people that I work with. Their job is stress. An example is that this infographic I found that says teachers make 1,500 educational decisions in the average school day. That amounts to 4 decisions every single minute. And teachers tell me, and I know this from being a former teacher myself, they are exhausted at the end of the day, completely mentally drained. So what I am proposing is that we don't lower stress, but that I help these professionals be better prepared for the battle that can be their job. I want to focus on increasing the recovery that they do get, and this will help them reduce their responsiveness to the stress. So it will reduce the magnitude with which that stress then impacts the rest of their day and even the rest of their life. It also helps to increase their capacity for coping. So it increases their ability to bounce back every single stressor that they encounter. This data is from some of the very first research that I did when I was in grad school, when I began working with Firstbeat, back when we had the first bodyguards that were a little clunky and harder to work with. And now the Bodyguard 2 is just a great tool, and it's made my life as a researcher so much easier. But so what you're looking at is I evaluated the stress levels of pre-service teachers. So these were teachers who were in their senior year, their last year of their education. They were preparing to go out into classrooms for a semester where they would be working with real life students. So this was a laboratory settings where we had their peers who were presenting as students, and they had to teach a 35-minute lesson. So I'll explain what all these data time points are for you so that you can kind of start mulling over the data as I talk through it. So first we have total. This is the first bar on each of these graphs, the real dark one. That is the entire 6-hour time period they wore the bodyguard. Then we have 35.1, 2, and 3. These 3 encompass the 35 minutes before the lesson that they taught, the 35 minutes during, and the 35 minutes after. So that's these light gray bars for all 3 of these. Then you have 5.1 through 5.7, that is the 5-minute time period analysis of their 35-minute lesson. So this gives you a snapshot of what was going on during the lesson that they were teaching. The 1.1 through 1.6 are each hour during the entire day. So this is as they're going through their day as a student. Hours 5 and 6 were the time periods when they were actually teaching in the classroom laboratory. So the 3 stress profiles, what happened when I analyzed the data is that the teachers very easily all fell into 3 separate groups. And this was, I was just taking a raw look at the data, and it was 3 distinct groups. And those turned out to be a low stress, what I call the low stress profile, the medium stress, and the high stress. And some really interesting themes emerged because what I did is I didn't stop at just analyzing their stress levels. I actually sat down and interviewed them. And I measured their stress levels in 2 separate lessons that they taught that were about 2 weeks apart. And I interviewed them within 2 to 3 days after they taught that lesson. I also had video recordings of these lessons. I sat in the classroom personally recording researcher notes. And what I started to find is if you kind of compare the 3 profile groups, one of the things that sticks out is what happens after they finish teaching. So that's going to be the 35.3. It's one of the lightest gray bars on the left. So in the 35 minutes after teaching, my medium and high stress profiles, they stayed high. And so the higher the number, the higher the stress. And this is, I analyzed HRV, so heart rate variability. Whereas my low stress teachers, as soon as the event was over, as soon as they were done teaching, they said, okay, I'm done. I can breathe, I can relax, and their stress levels lowered. In my medium and high stress teachers, the stress maintained or actually increased. And when I interviewed them and when I reviewed their reflection forms that they filled out after teaching, I found that what they were doing is they were perseverating and worrying about how their performance went. And so instead of just moving on with life and saying, you know, I have something else I have to be doing right now because they had another teacher who was teaching that they should have been listening to, they were sitting there beating themselves up about what went wrong, what could have gone wrong, what could have gone better. And this was very evident in my interviews with them. And so my medium and high stress people were actually adding stress to their that psychological stress to their lives just by beating themselves up. Whereas my low stress teachers, they moved on and they dealt with it on kind of their own terms. And then, you know, when you look at the pre-event hype, my low stress profile teachers, they were hyped up before they taught, but as they settled into teaching, it kind of lowered. So there's some very interesting differences that I noticed in the teachers. And so this brings up the question, what happens when people are not aware of their stress? I found that my high and medium stress teachers just honestly were not aware of their stress. And I found this with our law enforcement, every population I've looked at. When I have somebody who wears the heart rate monitor and does the lifestyle assessment, my high stress people honestly don't characterize themselves as high stress. They'll say things like, you know, if I notice that they are sweating a lot or that they're pacing or fidgeting or having a hard time recalling words, they'll just blame the symptoms on something else. They'll say, oh, I just sweat easily, or it was hot in that room. And I'm like, I was in that room and it was not that hot. So they blame it on everything else but the stress. They're not able to identify that the symptoms they're experiencing are a function of stress. When it comes to locus of control, they'll refuse ownership of outcomes that were not ideal. And if there was poor performance, they will not accept that they had some role in that not turning out how they wanted it to be. They'll say things like, you know, the old wives' tale, it was a full moon, you know, that kids act crazy on a full moon. And law enforcement, you know, kind of believe the same thing, that people just get crazy on a full moon. So their method of coping is casting blame somewhere else. They often, when people are not aware of stress, they will utilize ineffective coping mechanism. And so this kind of becomes a cycle of depletion, because they'll say, let's go to happy hour. So they'll go get drinks to decompress. And then, of course, they'll need a nap after that, because that's actually making them more tired. So they're using these coping mechanisms that are not actually solving a problem. Or they'll just give up, throw their hands up and say, well, there's nothing I can do about that. So the phrase that life happens to them rather than being an active agent for change in their environment is very much true. So when they process and they're doing that perseverating and beating themselves up, instead of coming up with some problem-solving strategies and really trying to figure out, okay, how can I make this better the next time I teach or the next time I'm on shift? How can I make this better? How can I prevent this from happening? They don't view themselves as able to enact change in their environment because things are happening to them. So how do you make them aware of stress? I have just been absolutely blown away at how powerful the lifestyle assessment process has been in being a change agent in stress recovery and awareness. People, as a general rule, tend to think they are exceptional. I find this with every group I'm working with. When I go in and I provide a talk about how stress works in your body and the importance of recovery and how you get recovery and all that, and I will have people honestly to my face tell me that they function just fine on 4 to 5 hours of sleep a night, that they have adapted. So I have people who think they're some higher form of organism that has rapidly adapted to be able to handle only 5 hours of sleep a night, or they feel like they are superhuman in their ability to cope with alcohol and things like that. Like alcohol doesn't affect their body the same as other people, things like that. So they often think they're the exception. And in order to get people who think they are exceptional in their ability to handle whatever it is, they need to see concrete evidence. And so they require to be shown. And so by showing that, having them wear the bodyguard, looking at their activity, their heart rate and what happens and respiration and all of that, and having them keep their journal, and then sitting down with them and showing their results to them and saying, your sleep is really actually kind of terrible. Like we need to figure out how to get your sleep recovery improved. And then once you start talking to them, they'll start talking about how they're doing lots of things that are actually preventing recovery and sleep. One of the more common ones that I find is alcohol. I'm not sure about globally in any other countries, but I know here in the US that there is this belief that if you've had a hard day, you go have a drink, whether it's a glass of wine or a beer, and it helps you decompress, or you have a glass of wine or a beer before you go to bed tonight because it's going to help you sleep better. Well, it may help you get to sleep, but the fact remains that it does not help recovery and sleep. It actually hurts your recovery and sleep. This is a printout of a day from 9 o'clock in the morning until 7 o'clock the following morning of one of the teachers that I've worked with who was out, I believe it was a weekend evening. She had gone to a wedding. And so you'll see right in here, there's lots of activities. These are all the wedding festivities, running around, dancing, doing whatever. And then you have sleep over here. So this is when she's sleeping. All the red bars means that you're seeing a stress reaction. And if you look at her average heart rate while she's sleeping, it's well in the 70s, and you have spikes above 100 at times while she's sleeping. So this is not good, and that tells me that when she wakes up, she's not going to be feeling real great. She's not going to be feeling rested or recovered or rejuvenated. So I asked her about that, and she said, yeah. And the next day, she said that's accurate. And the next day, she ends up taking a lot of naps. And so she takes naps to cope with the alcohol. And so what the alcohol does is it actually raises your heart rate. And I believe it's 10 to 15 beats per minute. And it's really fascinating because when people drink, if they tell me what time they started drinking, and I have their printout like this, I can usually tell them how many drinks they've had because it takes your body about an hour to process a serving of alcohol. And that usually really weirds people out, but I'm pretty accurate most of the time because as soon as I see that their body has processed alcohol, their heart rate will almost instantly drop, and typically you'll start seeing green in their sleep. And so this tells me she's waking up still with alcohol in her system. Her estimate was that she had about 10 units of alcohol in the span of the time that she was at the wedding reception. And in conversation with her, she estimated she probably had more than that. So when testing of strategies to enhance recovery and reduce stress level, so I already said I'm not trying to reduce stress level. Hopefully it's a byproduct of increased recovery. But here's a picture here of me charging a whole bunch of the bodyguards before I send them out to a group that I'm working with. So I do the lifestyle assessment and feedback session. And I look at, with them, I look at locus of control. So what factors within their life can they control? What factors can they change to increase recovery? If they are in a particularly precarious situation where they have really poor recovery in relation to the stress they're experiencing, I always recommend a follow-up. So when I sit down with them, we come up with some strategies for increasing recovery. I tend to focus on sleep when I do these sessions with them. And then I ask them to take a week or so to integrate these strategies, figure out which ones work best for them, and then wear the monitor again to see the change, because people like positive feedback. And it's really life-changing for people when they see that they've been able to increase their recovery just by making some small tweaks to their sleep. So here is one person I've worked with who, up here on the top, this is the same person from the alcohol and recovery chart earlier. Up here on the top is the first week that I had her wear the monitor. Then I did an education session on how sleep and recovery and stress works. And I had her wear this a couple weeks later. So I had her take about 2 weeks to kind of get in the hang of things and figure out the different strategies. The main thing we said was, let's try to regulate our alcohol a little better, especially during the week, so that we reduce its impact on sleep. So whether that's drinking earlier in the day or just not drinking as much. So she chose to not drink as much. And she said she actually, I believe it was on this night, Thursday night, she'd been invited to go out with friends, and she turned it down because it was a Thursday night. She had class the next day, and she knew she needed to function for class. So if you look at where she started, she was in a very much a depletion cycle, and where she ended, she had resources increased. She really talked about how she felt qualitatively like a different person. She said her thought process was much better when she was in her classes. She just had a lot more clear thinking, a lot more emotional regulation ability, didn't get upset with people as easily, things like that. So pretty powerful stuff. And the main thing we changed with her was just alcohol, because she was somebody who was drinking on a semi-regular basis. This was somebody who our intervention was twofold, and this is where the physical activity comes in. So he was working out, and you can see the blue bars where he was working out. He thought he was working out a lot harder than he actually was. So he had one pretty good session right here where he got his physical activity up, but it wasn't as high as he actually thought it was. The other habit he had is he was on his phone, laptop, iPad, TV. He was always on some form of electronic device up until the time he went to sleep. And that negatively impacts your sleep quality because your retina is interpreted as daylight. And so they say, hey, it's time to be awake. So what we did with him is I recommended he decrease the amount of time that he was on those electronic devices before bed and swapped it out for a book for at least 30 minutes before sleep. So he did that before sleep. And he also, based on the training reports I shared with him, he said, okay, I need to push it a little harder in the gym because I'm not getting the effects that I thought I was. And so as you can see by the darker blue bars, he definitely did increase his level of physical activity when he was at the gym, and he greatly increased his recovery during sleep, as evidenced by all these green pluses. And that was mainly because of the electronic devices. I mean, increased physical activity earlier in the day always does help your sleep. So those were two case studies of like some of the pretty typical advice that I end up giving people. And the thing is, for years, I had been telling people, you need to increase physical activity. You need to not be on electronic devices before sleep. And they listen, but they don't actually have a commitment to change that behavior until they see concrete evidence of how it impacts their own life. Once they see that, hey, I'm in a depletion cycle, I could be performing better in all aspects of my life, whether it's my personal relationships or professionally, if I would get better recovery in my sleep, then they say, okay, I need to take action to do something about this. But until they see that concrete evidence, they don't actually do anything effective. For my people who work in office type settings and teachers, is that there's strong evidence that nature supports stress lowering. And so by simply posting, putting posters or photos in the room of nature, it can elevate your recovery and lower some stress levels. So this is a photo of my dog out on our daily walk. out in the country in Illinois. So combining nature and exercise is always a great option. So that's kind of in short what the highs of what I have found. So I will turn it over for some questions.
Yes, thank you, Erica. Great, very interesting talk. And firstly, I can definitely say that the alcohol finding is not only in the US. I have conducted hundreds of those assessments around Europe and in other countries, and it's definitely a very common pattern in other countries as well, and a powerful learning lesson for many people. And I totally agree also on the concept that you mentioned, that it's not a question of if we have stress or not, almost regardless of what profession we really are doing. Of course, everyone has some level of stress, but the question is, are we able to turn it off, and how we deal with that, just like you were pointing out, and then trying to find strategies how to make those little tweaks in life. A couple of questions. One question, maybe you can just quickly define for some of the listeners, what is the LFHF ratio that you were showing on the bars for the different stress profiles?
Right. So I don't actually use it anymore, but that's what I used initially. I go more on heart rate specifically now. But it is the low frequency versus high frequency HRV. And so it's looking at the rate. So in common terms, it's looking at the ratio of your parasympathetic system and your sympathetic system activation. So that's your stress response system and your recovery response system. So it's looking at which one is more activated. So if that sympathetic is more activated than the parasympathetic, it's going to drive that number higher for a higher stress response.
Right. Yeah. And it's a bit more complicated than the ones that actually shown on the report, but yeah, that exactly different ways of looking at heart rate variability and the sympathetic parasympathetic balance.
Yeah, I just find the heart rate is a little easier for your normal person to understand. So
yeah,
I use it more in my intervention.
Yeah, so there's one more question here that I can ask. Just a second, I'm trying to open it up here. Regarding the night owl, I'm a night owl. Was that a common phrase from those who claim to be exceptional? For those who may not know, this phrase means a person who stays up late and sleeps in or loses sleep. So was that a common finding?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially with college students, which is a lot of the people I work with, you know, they'll say I'm a night owl, when in reality it's a function of they just aren't managing their stress effectively, so they are not able to turn off to go to sleep at a natural, normal time. I mean, our body has circadian rhythms that are set by the daylight, by the sun rising and setting. And so we get those out of whack with artificial lighting, screens, stress, that kind of thing.
Yeah. That's great. So I think that's the time that we have today. And if a few more questions pop up here in the last few seconds, we are happy to answer them via email in the next couple of days. And somebody had also asked about if the podcast will be available. So yes, we will have the podcast available. It will be on our website in a couple of days, and we'll send a thank you email to everyone who signed up for the webinar, and then when the podcast is available. So thank you so much, Erica, for today's presentation. If you do have specific questions about today's topic for Erica, you can contact her directly. Her email is here on the last slide. And if you're interested in hearing more about integrating the lifestyle assessment method into your own professional offering, you can contact me here at Firstbeat, tina.hoffman@firstbeat.com or info@firstbeat.com. You'll have those contact informations in the email that we'll be sending in the next couple of days. So thank you, Erica. Thank you everyone else for taking part today. We will have an updated schedule of the spring 2017 webinars soon. Right now there are no new ones scheduled, but we'll have several coming up between now and the summer. So stay tuned to that, and also our next newsletter. Have a great day, and thank you everyone.
Thank you.